going, everyone? It's been 3 years since I did my last rod setup video, and in that time the game has not changed at all, but the channel has, so I thought it was high time to make a new rod setup video. Quicker, snappier, and hopefully more helpful. First, we're going to do a brief description of the rod and reel attributes, which will hopefully help you understand how to piece together a rod, reel, and line so that they work together in a successful setup. Next, we'll go down the list, hitting up all these things I've listed up above: spinning rod, telescopic rod, match rod, casting rod, feeder rod, bottom rod, carp rod, and SPOD rod, which will also list down below in this helpful little time bar thing down here. Oh, I gotta do it in front, down here. So you can skip ahead to whichever rod you need specifically, hopefully save you some time. My ask is that you hopefully give me a like for my time putting this together. So hook that like button, pack your tackle boxes, and let's get to fishing, everyone. First off, a brief description of rod and reel attributes. This can help you really piece together a rod, reel, and line to make a successful setup. So here we go. Durability. I like to think of this as like the health of the rod, but a big thing to know for Fishing Planet is that it doesn't, like, the rod doesn't get worse or better depending upon how much health it has. As long as you keep that sucker from hitting 0, you are good. But if it hits 0, it's broken. You have to trash it and you have to buy a new one from the store. So my advice to you is don't waste your money. Consider if there's even a better rod that you can just upgrade to versus repairing your last one, and only repair if it's about to hit 0. Length. This is how long your rod is. It can really be helpful when you're casting lighter lures or perhaps lighter baits, which can't really cast so far with the weight, but with the added length you can get a little bit more distance out of your casts. Lure weight. Now this one's important. Too light of a lure and you're not going to be able to cast as far. Too heavy of a lure, you might break your line or your rod, which definitely isn't good. So make sure you keep your lures within this range or as close to it as possible, because even missing that range can damage how you twitch or your stop and go. Any of those retrieval methods can be damaged by not keeping that lure within that range. So hopefully you know your fractions. Power. This is how much resistance the rod has from being flexed. Important in real life, not so much in Fishing Planet. Line weight, also very important. Perhaps the most important thing other than lure weight. This is how strong of line you can have on your rod so that you can kind of understand where your reel should be in terms of max drag, as well as the strongest line you can have. So we have a 3 to 9 pound line weight on the Featherlight here. That means that the strongest line we can put on this is 9 pounds, but it doesn't necessarily hurt it too much to go over by a pound or two, and sometimes even a little bit more. Action. This is how much your rod flexes under strain. Also important in real life, not so much in Fishing Planet. Pieces and guides, you know, that's how much your rod pulls apart and how many guides you have to line up the line. You can look at it in real life, but just don't worry about it in Fishing Planet. Now on to the reels here. Durability, same as the rod. Keep it from hitting 0 and you're good to go. Ratio. This is something that is also important in real life, but because we have the recovery stat in Fishing Planet, it's not very important in the game. Recovery though, this can be a big one when you're looking at pike or carp or chinooks or tarpon, any fish that likes to do really big runs and then come straight back to you, and you need to reel in that line before you lose tension. The recovery can be a huge thing. If you're losing fish because of low tension, it's most likely because of the recovery and also a little bit with the max drag. So keep your reels at a recovery that's high unless you're targeting slow moving fish that don't go out for big runs and come back. Capacity. This is how much line your reel can take. I mean, as long as you really have like 250 feet, you should be fine for the majority of fish. Even here I have 215, and that should be pretty much fine for the fish we're targeting with a Featherlight rod. Until you start going for big catfish or arapaima or some sharks or something like that, or any of the fish of the Congo, you really don't need to worry about the capacity of your line as long as you keep it in the mid 200s or something like that. And that's feet. I don't know what it is in metric. But then we reach max drag. This is perhaps the most important part of your reel, followed by recovery. The max drag is telling you how strong of a fish you can basically handle. And just for the word of the wise, I like to take this number and multiply it by 2 just to get an idea of the strongest fish I can handle. So with this 7.7 pound reel, we can't really hit max drag, so I'm gonna be thinking that we're probably gonna be targeting a fish around 13 pounds. But this is where I want to give you one of the most important tips in the game. You need to remember this this order. You need to have the rod at the strongest, the reel at the weakest, and line in the middle. Say it with me: rod strongest, reel weakest, line in the middle. So if we're looking at this featherlight setup that we have here, we have a 3 to 9 pound rod, we have a 7.7 pound reel, and in between we got 8 pound line. That's 9 pounds, 7.7 pounds, 8 pound line. And that's gonna give you your strong rod, weak reel, line in the middle. Easy way to remember it, but we'll mess it up a little bit along the way. Ball bearings, weight and drag, don't worry about it, not important in the game. All right, with those out of the way, it's time to move on to the setups. And feel free to watch it again if anything's still a little fuzzy. Hey, you. So you say you like fishing and hunting in the outdoors, but you're not following the modern day outdoorsman? You know it's cool, right? I mean, I don't want to pressure you into doing anything, but give it a shot. And I'll make you a deal. You subscribe, and I'll let you watch the videos for free. And that's a great price. Plus, we have cool shirts. So follow the MDO today. We're going to be starting off with the spinning rod and telescopic rod, two of the rods you first start off with in Fishing Planet, which is why they're pretty darn straightforward. Spinning rod. Now we've already been over this in the little description of the attributes, but we've got a 9 pound featherlight rod, we've got a 7.7 pound reel, and we've got 8 pound line in between. That is hitting up that strong rod, weak reel, line in between. Rod, line, reel. You know, strongest to lightest there. We've also got a fluorocarbon leader on this as well, and it's at 7.9 pounds. Now, why is that, you might ask? Well, you really want to keep your leader slightly weaker than your main line. So we got 8 pound main line, 7.9 pound leader, and that's going to ensure that fish were to take us out to 220 feet and break us off. Well, at that point, we would lose all 220 feet of line. Unless, of course, our leader was weaker, in which we would lose our leader and we'd still get all 215 feet of our line back. I realized I said 220 and 215, just look past that. We've got a casting spoon that is 1/3 ounce, and if we look at our little featherlight lure weight, we got 1/16 to 2/5 ounce, which means we fit in between that range. So spinning rod, boom, done. Telescopic rod, same dealio. We've got a 13 pound rod, we've got a 13 pound reel. Oh, whoa, how can this be? 13 pound rod, 13 pound reel, 13 pound line. Everything matches up there. We're all good. Especially since we're not going to be hitting the max drag on the reel anyway. So really, it's really like, you know, 11, 12 pound drag. So we're going to be just fine. Hook size for the fish we're fishing for. If we're targeting a really small fish, then we got a number 6 hook, which isn't even that small. For some people, a number 6 hook is not small. They could go down to a number 20 or something like that. But a big thing to remember is that your bait and your bobber are linked. You need to be thinking about the weight of your bait and then the bobber's float. Unfortunately, they don't match up the words. So you can see here the bobber has a max floating weight of low, but if we look at the bait, it has a weight of light. It would be nice if they just used light or low, but unfortunately they use them differently. So when you're looking at your baits and the bobbers, just realize that if it says extra light, then the bobber can be extra low. If it's heavy, then it can be high. You know, you just need to use those words interchangeably. If it's extra heavy, then it's extra high, you know? Otherwise, your float's not gonna work as well, or your bites aren't gonna be translated as well if you're using too heavy of a float with lighter bait. You do have an option of adding a leader, but it's not required. Telescopic rod, boom, done. Match rod. This is essentially just a large telescopic rod, except instead of telescoping, it's 3 pieces in this case, you know? It's just a big float rod. We've got the same thing here, 25.5 pound rod, we've got a 24.2 pound reel, and then we've got 25 pound line in between. Heavy rod, low reel, line in between. That's what we're shooting for. We've got an extra high pear-shaped float with an extra heavy minnow. Once again, match your float and your bait together. You should be good. Hook for whatever you're going for. You can adjust your length of your your space between your bobber and your hook. Same thing on the telescopic rod. I'm sorry I missed that, but that's basically how you target the fish. If you're going for a very deep area, you set it up high of 98 inches, or if you're just needing a few inches, like 18 inches for 1.5 feet, then you can just do that. Now, something to obviously consider with the match rods is if you're going for pike or something like that, you might be wanting to throw on a titanium leader, so that way you can keep your line from not breaking with those sharp teeth of the pike. But that's pretty much it. Moving on, casting rod. Pretty much the same exact thing as the darn spinning rod. I mean, it's just identical almost. We got our rod, 24 pounds. We got our reel, 23 pounds. We got our line, 23 pounds, matching off because we can't use max drag, or we can, just not for very long. So this is gonna work just fine. We've thrown on a 22.2 pound titanium leader, which should work just fine for the most part, and it will keep any toothy fish like pike from breaking it. We've got a buzz bait, we've got a nymph on there. You can throw on little lures if you want to, or you can just throw the buzz bait, but you can throw on little soft plastics to kind of go after fish. If you look in your fish species, sometimes there's soft plastics that they like, and you can throw it on the back of a buzz bait or a spinner bait or anything like that. So you can throw on those and you should be good to go. Feeder rod, though, this one can trip people up sometimes, and it's honestly for a very simple thing. So we've obviously got our strong rod, weak reel line in between. We've got our 7-pound rod, we've got a 7-pound reel, and we've got 8-pound line. Oh no, it'll honestly be okay. It's gonna be just fine. Half-pound sinker, because if we look at our casting weight, instead of a lure this time, we're gonna be throwing bait and a sinker. So we've got 3/8 to 1 3/7 ounce. So we need to make sure that our sinker and our bait fits in between that range. So we've got a 1/2 ounce, and then we've got our bait, which is gonna fit between that range just fine. It can be tempting sometimes to try to max out the sinker for this weight, but you know, if you get too heavy, the rod or line could break, which is not good. Now we've thrown on a titanium leader to work with this setup just fine, but you could throw on a fluorocarbon leader or anything like that. The most important thing is that you need to have a leader. You cannot use a feeder rod without a leader. Same thing with the bottom rod. And then just for added benefit, throw on a bell there. That way, if you're not using a rod stand that can have an alarm or something like that, you'll get some sort of notification that you have a bite. It's never a bad thing to have it on there, even if you have it in a rod stand with an alarm. It's just good to have on there. Make a template with it on there. It's gonna be great. Now I should add in here that something you can do with the feeder rod is actually throw on a feeder. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward there, but if you were going for a whitefish or a carp or something like that, you could throw on a feeder and then put together some bait from your ground bases in your recipe here, and then you could throw it into your feeder when you reach your fishing location to attract fish to go after our corn here. This is something you can do if you want to, or if you just want to fish some minnows or something like that, you can certainly do that as well. Feeder rod, boom, done. Bottom rod now, essentially just a big feeder rod. I mean, it's very similar in the way that you can throw on a feeder if you want to, or you can just use a sinker. We've got very strong reels. Now we're getting into like the big rods and stuff like that. We got the Makanzi, 81.6 pounds on the rod here. We got 81.5 pounds on the reel, and I'm assuming this is going to be heavier. Yeah, 83.8. We didn't find, there's no line that's in between those, but 83 pounds, it's not gonna, you know, it's not the end of the world. Plus, by the time you're using a rod of this strength, you have all the money in the world too, $2 million. You don't really care if the rod loses, you know, durability. We can just repair it if we want to. We've got fluorocarbon leader on there, same as the main line. I don't even care at that point. I honestly don't think I'm going to lose a fish at this length. Even if it did, then I'll just buy more line. We got a cap and hook 12-aught, and then we've got our bell, like I said, and some large minnows. But yeah, anyway, rod, reel, line, all that jazz, we should be good to go. But just as the feeder rod, make sure you have your leader on there, because if you don't have a leader, not gonna work. You need to have the leader on there for the rod to work. Bottom rod, boom, done. Carp rods, this is a fun one, and it can be kind of confusing for some people. The biggest thing about carp rods is that you can only target carp, which seems pretty straightforward, but you know, some people think if they buy a carp rod, they'll be able to use it for like catfish or sturgeon or something like that, but no. You can only put on like vegetables and pop-up boilies and stuff like that on these rods, so you need to remember that. Don't buy these thinking you can use it for a sturgeon or a catfish, but otherwise pretty straightforward as well. We got a 58.4 pound rod here, 55.5 on the reel, and then we've got 57 pound braid in between. You got that heavy rod, weak reel, line in between is the biggest thing there. You can use a carp leader with these carp rods, which is a big thing. You can't really use carp leaders on any other rod, only carp rods. Same with the darn carp hooks, you can only use them on this rod, which is a big thing. These carp camouflage sinkers you can use on either, you know, bottom rods or feeder rods or whatever, but you can use it on this as well, which is kind of a fun little camouflage sinker there. And then we've got a pop-up boilie. Now, another thing that you can use with these carp rods only is this flat feeder, which you can then put feed onto, which we already talked about with the feeder rod. But any of these ground bait and whatnot, you can put together a recipe and put it together at the fishing location, and then you can just put it straight onto the method lead. Now, I'm not really sure if you can put on other things, but I do know that if you go to ground bait bases, you can go down to method, and these method mixes will specifically work with that method lead. I'm not sure if you can put on other ones. You might play it safe and only use those method bases. Otherwise, carp rods, great for carp. You can use the method leads, you can use the carp leaders and the carp hooks, but you can't use it for the catfish or sturgeons, just those. But hopefully that helps you out. Carp rod, boom, done. And lastly, the SPOD rod. Now, if you don't know what a SPOD rod is, in these past rods where we had like a feeder to lead in fish with some bait, these SPOD rods will just throw that bait out there into a pile onto the bottom of the lake or whatever to lead in fish, or perhaps a really big fish to come to your other rods. So this rod is literally just a big old SPOD, and it's gonna be filled with bait, and you're just tossing it out there, and it opens up when it hits the water, dumps all the bait out, and then you reel it back in, fill it back up, and toss it out there yet again. For that reason, we need a really strong rod to handle all that weight of that bait. We need some strong line, and we need a reel with a really high recovery to reel that sucker in as fast as possible so that we can toss it out again. So we've got a 48-pound rod here. We've got a 81.5-pound reel, which doesn't make sense, but basically what I'm trying to do is use that 47-inch recovery to reel this in as fast as possible. You can throw on another reel that has a high recovery, and as long as it works with this line and the rod, you should be fine. Then you just need a large spot to pack in as much bait as possible, but only if it works for your rod and reel and line. But even then, you may notice that the number is red, and that's fine because we can't make the bait at the main page. We need to go to the fishing area to mix together our recipe, which then will show up in our ground bait pouch of our backpack at the fishing location. So we have all of our mixes in here. If we take all of this to the fishing location, mix it together in the recipes tab, then it will show up in our ground bait mix pouch as a little ball at the top here, which will then transfer over to our spot so that we can throw it out there. It's kind of one of those things where you kind of have to do it to understand what I'm saying, but it's really straightforward. But with that, SPOD rod, boom, done. And with that, you should know the basics of how to put your rods, reels, and lines together in Fishing Planet. Just remember that strong rod, weak reel, line in between. As well as the general concept that to target the fish, you need to have a max drag that is half of the weight of the largest fish you may catch. I hope this was helpful, and if it was, consider hooking that like button and hitting the subscribe button with the bell for notifications for any future Fishing Planet videos or any other fishing games in the future. I wrote out this entire script and voiced it all before realizing that they're going to be putting out the ocean fishing map soon, and we might have squid rods and we might have trolling rods, which aren't included in this list, but we'll just worry about that later. If you want to join us for our live streams every Monday, Wednesday, 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. Central, I'd love to see you there. But until the next episode, everyone, comment down below if you have any favorite rods or reels that you want to share with your fellow angler. We'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone, and as always, remember, everyone, we're one planet, one family, game on.